Hello to all and welcome back to my channel. Today's video we're going to be talking about U.S. Army Flight School. I'll give you guys my experience so far, talk to you guys about some of the classes that I've gone to, some of the experiences that I've had, and for those of you who want to see yourself in my shoes, maybe give you guys some tips on what are some things you can expect when you get here and how to make it this far. So without further ado, let's just jump right into the video. In my last video, we discussed WOCs, or Warrant Officer Candidate School. For WOCs, I gave you guys my personal insight. I told you guys some of the things that I experienced. The next class after WOCs is Wobc, or Warrant Officer Basic Course. Obviously, it's a warrant officer class, so if you're a commissioned officer seeking the aviation branch, you're not going to expect to be in Wobc. You'll be in BOLIC, or Basic Officer Leader Course, I believe it's called. I have no in-scoop on BOLIC. I hear it's similar to Wobc in the sense of we both go to the range. We both have the M4 readiness range. We also do the M9 pistol range, and so those are the two times where during Wobc us warrant officers join together with the commissioned officers and we train together. So essentially what Wobc is, it's a basic overview of the Army's aviation branch. This kind of goes into the units, how they're structured. For example, you have maintenance platoon, this platoon is going to be for something else, etc. It talks about exactly how your chain of command is structured and things like that. One of the things that you'll do during Wobc is take a exam on vehicle identification. Essentially what you'll be doing is looking at different vehicles and distinguishing between enemy versus friendly, as well as what category of vehicle that belongs to. And things like, if it'll show you, an example would be, it'll show you a Padlin, a U.S. Army Padlin, and you have to be able to, just by looking at it, tell what it is, tell what category it is, artillery, stuff like that. And the test itself, it's not hard. It's mostly rote memorization, but you have to really kind of get into, okay, this vehicle looks like this, it must mean this. Oh, it has this characteristics, and be able to have that key detail that makes that vehicle stand out, because sometimes it won't be as obvious to you as a U.S. Army vehicle. Sometimes it'll be a friendly force that isn't enemy but isn't U.S. Army, and so that's something to look forward to. It's mostly rote memorization though. That's not really something that I can kind of guide you guys on, but just kind of get into studying that and you'll be fine. It's not a hard exam at all. Another exam that you can expect during Wobc, it will be on aviation maintenance. That one itself, it's a basic military class, PowerPoints discussing aviation maintenance, and you just take a test on it later that week. It all happens kind of fast, but the information during Wobc, I will say, it's not hard. Wobc isn't necessarily a filler course though. The reason why I say that is because Wobc accounted for approximately like 25 to 30% of your overall OML ranking. That I didn't know until kind of later, but if you take Wobc serious, you can essentially get a better ranking on your OML once Common Core is done. They do calculate how well you do in Wobc, and I want to emphasize that because some people kind of were surprised when we got our ranking back on the OML, and they were wondering why so low, or why did they score the way that they did. That Wobc accounts for like 30% of your overall ranking, just so you're aware. After Wobc, the next class is Sere. Sere School, I'm not able to say much on Sere School. Obviously, it's a confidential course, so I don't want to go and risk my career going on camera on the internet blabbing about Sere School. The only thing that I will say on Sere School is pay attention to the packing list. If it's listed as a mandatory item, bring the mandatory item. If it's an additional item, obviously you don't have to bring it, but if you have questions on the packing list, be sure to ask, don't assume before you're going into Sere School. And once you complete Sere School, the next week, about approximately 4 days later, you can expect to be in Common Core. For those of you who are officers, my experience was that they front-loaded the warrant officers ahead of the commissioned officers. So some of the commissioned officers in my Sere School didn't get selected for the following course, the running on course after Sere. Instead, they were a class behind or something like that. But for you warrant officers, you would get front loaded. For you National Guard folks, you would get front loaded, being that your state is paying for your training and they want to get you back to your state as soon as possible. The longer you're there, the more they have to pay you and the less work you're doing for the unit. For your active duty folks, you'll be less of a priority throughout your time here in Fort Rucker compared to National Guard. That's just how it is. Common Core is 100 training days, and I will put parentheses around 100 training days because for any reason that could be extended, and the main culprit that we've been seeing lately has been maintenance. You can't fly, the helicopters are down, it is what it is. You can expect a delay. In fact, I haven't seen any class graduate on time since me being here. My class, we ended up graduating a whole month behind course, and so that is what it is. Other things that are out of control of anybody ever outside of, you know, the man upstairs, weather, that could affect. And so you want to be sure to keep that in your mind when you're going to Common Core, and you know, you just learn the days kind of just repeat itself. Training dates 67 just happen again and again because you just weren't able to fly. That's just how it is. The general setup of how Common Core is structured, you have half the day you will have flight line, and the other half of the day you will have academics. Now, depending on what week it is for your group, you will alternate. So one week you may have flight line in the mornings in the AM, and the next week you may have flight line in the PM, and vice versa for academics. If you have flight line in the AM, you'll have academics in the PM. That's how it is. Every week you flop back and forth. And Common Core is the most stressful part of flight school so far. In fact, Common Core, this is the part where stress starts to happen very much with your flying. You're gonna have a lot of knowledge given to you. They call it the fire hose. You're drinking out of a fire hose here with knowledge. And for me, my experience so far has been that it's the density of knowledge, the amount of knowledge within such a short period of time. And that's kind of where the stress came in and the gray hair started to show up. I will say, if you have any past flying experience, it does help coming here, but not necessarily if you were fixed wing. Obviously, if you have any instrument experience, that's going to save you a lot of headache and potentially a lot of time. But other than that, you know, learning how to hover, learning how to the basic controls of the aircraft, those things kind of come naturally. And they will tell you here the studying is up to us, the academics is up to us, but leave the flying up to the IPs. Don't stress so much because you think that you should be able to hover by now and you aren't. At one point, it'll just kind of click. I'll discuss more on hovering and the other techniques of flying a little bit later in the video. Common Core is broken down into 6 sections. You have Preflight, or another word, ground school, is what they call it. You have Primary 1, Primary 2, Basic Instruments, Advanced Instruments, and BWS, or Basic Warfighting Skills. So ground school is 2 weeks. During this 2 weeks, you will not be flying yet, but you will find out what class hat you are, as well as your stick buddy. During this time, you will be introduced to daily questions, but you won't be expected to necessarily remember. This is the part where you're given a little bit of grace with those daily questions, and you won't be listed as an unsat if you don't know a daily question off the top of your head. During ground school, you'll also be doing CPTs, or cockpit trainers. This is where you'll be given a UH-72 checklist and learn how to start up the helicopter. It'll be done in a simulator. Obviously, you're not in an actual aircraft. But during this time, you're getting familiar with the flight controls, as well as learning how to start up the helicopter without exceeding any limit. During ground school, you'll also do aeromedical. It's one of the first exams that you take in flight school. I will say that aeromedical is very extensive, in my opinion. I do think they kind of dive very deep into things that kind of have my head scratching, like, shouldn't the doctor know this? And I don't know. I felt like after I finished that class, I was basically a doctor. I mean, you couldn't tell me anything. I passed the exam. I don't need a PhD at that point. But what aeromedical essentially is it talks about the effects of flight on the human body. And so you'll talk about things such as spatial disorientation, hypoxia. These are concepts that any aviator should know about, because there are signs that could happen while you're flying. You should be able to pick them out, and you learn about them here. And they'll put you in this kind of, they'll simulate even hypoxia, so that way you'll be able to know what your signs are, because apparently the signs of hypoxia are different for everybody. There's a large list of what most people report, and then there are the signs that you display. And so that was a pretty cool part of aeromedical. I had a good time in aeromedical. But that's the first exam that you're going to take during Common Core, is aeromedical. And then after ground school, you have P1. This is where you start to finally fly. It's 4 weeks for this section of Common Core. And during this time, you're starting daily questions. And you can actually get unsat for not knowing the daily questions. A thing about the daily questions, one thing you need to note is that every question that you're given, typically those questions are around the subject material that you guys are going over for this section. So if you're in instruments, the daily questions are on instrument. They're instrument questions. However, as you progress throughout the course, and let's say you complete P1 and you make it all the way to BWS, well, they can still ask you a question from 2 months earlier in the course, talking about a question that you learned in P1. And so you don't take the information that you learn, you absorb from the daily questions. You have to repeatedly throughout Common Core, you're constantly learning, and you don't get to just lose that information. Your brain is the iceberg, and all the important details are sitting on top. Those are the penguins. And the more you learn, just you realize there's not a lot of space for too many penguins, and so you'll have penguins just kind of going off. The hardest part about these daily questions is just kind of keying in on which information you're probably going to go over. And it sucks because you never necessarily know if you're going to get called on. They randomly select you out of the class to stand up in front of everybody and recite the answer to whatever question that they ask you. And one of the things about the questions they'll ask you are the emergency procedures. You need to know those emergency procedures no matter what section you're in, just a heads up. But even with the emergency procedures, they're very specific, and they expect you to answer the question, the daily question, in a way that doesn't change the meaning of whatever it is that you're reciting. So maybe the emergency procedure, you're reciting it, and one of the words of the emergency procedure is collective lever raise, but instead you say collective lever adjust. Well, you can adjust the collective lever two ways. You can raise it or you can lower it. So which way? Which one is it? You've just altered the meaning of that emergency procedure. Therefore, you will get a no, and you potentially get an unsat for daily questions for that day. So you want to be that's the hard part about the daily questions. You just want to know verbatim the information, as well as you're learning it for the first time. So it's just a lot. The water hose effect, just keep pushing forward. Like Dory said, just keep swimming, you'll be all right. During your time in P1, you're gonna have a total of 21.3 flight hours. You will also do 4.5 hours in a simulator, and you're gonna do your first flight. Now your first flight, this is called your nickel ride. This is where you go out, find a nickel with your birth year on it, and after your IP takes you out to the stage fields, show you the world like Aladdin, and have you touch the sticks for the first time, you're expected at the end of that ride to hand that IP, your nickel with your birth year on it. And I can say it was the coolest thing ever, 10 out of 10 experience. So some of the maneuvers that you're gonna learn during P1, you're gonna learn how to accelerate, as well how to decelerate, how to slow down. You're gonna learn how to hover. You're gonna do traffic patterns where you're at a stage field taking off, and you're taking off and just doing a huge square in the sky, and you're landing. And that's essentially the basics of what you're learning. You're also going to do radio calls. So while you're at these stage fields, they're towered. They have a tower out there directing traffic, and you'll learn how to, you know, make the radio call, telling the tower who you are, where you're going, what you want to do. You want to do stuff like that early on and get familiar with the radios as soon as possible, because as the course progresses, you're just going to get on the radio more and more. So just get comfortable with being uncomfortable on the radios. And the last thing you're going to do for P1 is your check ride. You're going to do 3 of those traffic patterns that I mentioned earlier, and you are going to just terminate the traffic pattern to a hover. And once you are done with your check ride and you pass, the next thing you will do is your solo. And so your solo, you're just going to do the same thing you did for your check ride, 3 VMC approaches, those traffic patterns I talked about earlier, except this time you won't have the aid of your IP in the cockpit. You would be in the cockpit, you would be in the helicopter with just you and your stick buddy, and you would do those 3 patterns. Once you complete that, you will then get your wings, and you will feel like you're superior to the other class because they don't have their wings yet. But humble yourself because you're not a pilot yet. After P1 is 3 weeks of P2, and during P2 it's pretty much similar to what you were doing in P1, except now you are doing different types of taking off as well as different types of landings. So you're doing things like auto rotations, run-on landings, single engine run-ons. You're doing a fixed tail pitched landing where you're doing a low approach, simulating that your pedals don't work and maybe something's wrong with your the tail of the aircraft. You're doing different types of takeoffs, constant angle takeoffs, level takeoffs, and this is where you really familiarize yourself with the emergency procedures and really get familiar with the different types of approaches that coordinate, approaches that coordinate with that emergency procedure. And it's a blast. During P2, you shouldn't really stress much. The check ride was, for me, one of the easier check rides there was. And yeah, that's P2. During P2, you do a total of 20.6 flight hours. So after your P2 check ride is BI, or basic instruments. This is the part where you'll go from flying at the flight line and you'll transfer over to the simulators. And during this time, you won't be flying the aircraft at all. You'll actually just be doing sim training. You'll get introduced to instruments. You'll be learning how to fly. What essentially BI is you're learning how to fly without the visual aid of being able to see outside, up until you get to a certain point of the runway, that is. During BI, there's a lot of concepts that, for me, I did need to get adjusted to. I had a hard time initially with being oriented, knowing where I am in relation to where I'm going. And once you get over that, if you have no experience in instruments, that's kind of the hardest part for a lot of people. Once you get over that, though, you realize BI is actually pretty fun. It's pretty cool. Being able to plan your entire flight route, have a plan for your alternate route, stuff like that, and not needing to look outside one time, knowing what to expect, what's going to come next. That was a pretty decent concept. I liked BI. Once I got it down packed and was able to understand it, it was pretty cool. During BI is also a great time to take the military competency non-category exam in order for you to receive a FAA commercial instrument certification. This cert is something that will be helpful if you have any aspirations of becoming an airline pilot or just working and having your commercial license outside of the military. It'll definitely be good to have extra rating. It's one extra thing that you can get the Army to pay for. You'll have to pay initially, and the Army reimburses you for it, but I'd say go for that during the time that you are in BI, because during that time, it's when instruments is the most fresh in your mind. The way instruments is, if you stop using it, then you kind of just forget it, and over time, it'll be harder for you to later take it, and more expensive at that for you to take it. So I'd say go ahead and do it now. That's a pretty cool thing I didn't know about until I got to Common Core. So after BI, then it's back to the flight line for AI, or advanced instruments. AI is pretty much BI, except Now you're in the actual aircraft doing everything you just did and you learned in the simulators. You're gonna now do it in real life. And so the difference would obviously be the feeling of the controls when flying the simulator versus flying in real life. But honestly, once you get instruments down, it's not hard at all. I would say don't let not knowing, getting ahead of the aircraft. There you go. The biggest thing with BI that I see, and I even had to kind of get in tune with, is getting ahead of the aircraft, meaning knowing what's getting ready to happen next so you can prepare yourself for it. Training aids are the GOAT when it comes to this section. I really liked having in my knee board, I just have, my setup, how I would set up my radios, in what order. I'd have it all in my knee board. I'd also have how I'd have my displays up, my navigation display, my primary display. I'd have it all set up, in knowing exactly what comes next. That's really helpful, because you can get pretty task saturated in that aircraft between trying to fly and understanding what's going on, and then as well as navigating. Even if you're not looking outside, it's still, for somebody like me who don't have any experience, it was still a lot. So having those training aids definitely saved me a check ride or two. I would say if you can get a hold when you first get to Common Core, you'll be introduced to your IPs. They have some training aids they can give you. If you can get a hold from previous classmates on these training aids, and they can kind of help explain, what's coming up in the upcoming section, definitely do that. It saved me a lot knowing and being able to plan out my entire route. During BI and AI, that's the time where, do everything you can to pass. I even had a hard time with remembering, what is this radio call? I would literally write down the script of what I was supposed to say, and I knew what they were getting ready to say. So with AI, if you just know what they're getting ready to come up, you'll be fine. That's pretty much all AI is. It's predictable flying. You'll be fine. That's my kind of 2 cents on AI there. And also AI is 3 weeks, 17 and a half flight hours, 0 sim hours. So yeah, another thing that was cool about AI that I like, my favorite part of AI was actually the food. We'd fly to different airports. You go from Dothan to Mariana in Florida, you go to Georgia, being able to get out the aircraft, and when we're fueling up, just get out and kind of grab some food. And my stick buddy, he's flying back, so I'm just kind of in the back munching and trying to, help him in the back with whatever he needs, but at the same time, munching on food in the back. That was a pretty neat experience. I like that. After AI, then you have basic warfighting skills. And this section is the part where you're learning how to fly tactically. You're doing a lot of low-level flying over tree lines and down near where the rivers are, streams are, and doing contour routes. And you're really feeling like an actual Army aviator for the first time. You do feel like you've learned all this stuff, and it's led you up to kind of putting it together in relation to how it applies in the Army, how you'll be flying. And so during BWS, it's pretty chill. You have a lot of information that's thrown at you still at this part, but you're able to understand it a lot better. Therefore, you're able to digest the information a lot better. I did feel like my understanding of what was going on was a lot more smooth once I got to BWS, and I was able to throw things together and for some reason remember just a lot more. When those penguins I thought jumped off from BI, I thought they were gone, I had to relearn them. Turns out when I got asked questions in BWS, I was able to answer these questions. So that was pretty chill. When you're flying in BWS, you're navigating using a map book. The map book consists of 30 maps of the local area, and you get these maps issued to you in the beginning. From there, you take that map book, or you take these maps, you draw out all obstacles on the maps, like power lines, towers, stuff like that. And from there, it's when you put them together into a book and you open it and you're looking while you're flying. You're drawing out your flight routes so you know where you're going. And during flight, you're just kind of navigating using that book. That was one of the more traditional things that older aviators had to do in order to navigate. And I guess that's just the way of passage, the rite of passage on how they do things now. They still have it. I personally don't think it's necessary. Or, you know, I take that back. I do think it's really nice to be able to have multiple forms of being able to navigate via map, via, you know, the technology in the aircraft. I would say it actually is a good skill to know. But I do recognize, you do recognize early, like, you know, I can get there if I just put it into the GPS and do this. It's just in case that isn't available, you're able to use a map. It's good to know that skill. But the thing about these flight routes and using your map is, dude, it just takes a long time for you to flight plan. I on average, I'd spend anywhere from like 4 to 5 hours planning my route for the next day, so that way I can fly my route, and it had to be good, and I have to make sure it was accurate, because if not, you'll get thrown off. You go a completely different way. You go outside of the training area where you guys are authorized to fly, or even worse, you could potentially find yourself in a dangerous situation. And the thing I'd say with that flight planning is, so if you go to the hangar, they have a store called the Hangar, which is like saving grace here, outside of the gate, the Daleville gate. You go there and you buy these measuring rulers, and I'll go ahead and put it in here, a picture of what it looks like in the video. But you take this measuring ruler and it just helps you verify whatever you put, your time tick marks, your distance tick marks. It has a lot of these things. This will make sense when you get there, but if you utilize some of the tools, it can save you time when it comes to flight planning. Because what I attempted to do originally, I used amps, and amps, it was constantly like letting me down. Amps was, I mean, the most unreliable piece of equipment of all military equipment. I mean, it's really cool when it does work. It's an amazing asset, but I just could not stand amps. I ended up just going and using that measuring tool I told you guys about from the hangar, and just planning all my flight routes through there, because I'd get off of you know, I come from the flight line, I have to immediately go to do my flight plan, and I just felt like I was just eating my time, taking, like I told you guys, 4 or 5 hours if I'm using amps, 3 to maybe 4 if I didn't. It just saved me like a whole hour of trying to just get the program up and running, and making sure that it's, you know, not continuously reading error, and not loading and maybe crashing. And I just hated that part. So that's something that you guys can use if you get here. If you don't like amps, for you National Guard folks, I hear the National Guard units, they pay for ForeFlight for you guys, so you guys get to use that, not have to worry about amps. You plan your routes that way. But for us active duty folks, we have to use amps, and man, that, I mean, they need to really figure out what's going on with amps. I did not like amps at all. That's just a tip for BWS on flight planning. During BWS, you're also using a lot more radios, and there's a lot more going on in your ear, so you will learn to get proficient at hearing when something is for you, as well as you need to get down your radio calls. Like I said earlier, for instruments, I wrote down every script on what I was going to say. You also get to plan your flight route. So, hello, just look at, hey, I'm supposed to turn to this heading at this time, and I'll see this key terrain outside. Okay, what else? Oh, I also need to make my radio calls when I'm here, entering into the RT about 5 kilometers out. I'm going to make this radio call. Stuff like that. Those training aids will literally get you to pass with flying colors. I'm really big on training aids. You will do a check ride where you're flying, doing the same routes you've been doing this whole time throughout BWS. Same concept. You're just planning out your flight plan and flying that route. And then your stick buddy, when you get over to the airport where you are fueling up at, your stick buddy hops in the front seat and flies their route back. And after that, then you guys do solos. And for our class, unfortunately, we didn't do solos because we just had too many weather days back to back where we did not fly consistently, and so our solo was canceled. But they haven't stopped solos. Actually, they actually brought it back recently, flying solos. So you can probably expect to still be flying, them to be doing that when you get here, if you come in the near future. But during solos, you're doing the same thing for your check route, except you're not stopping at any RTs. You're only stopping at the airport, and it's just you and your stick buddy in the cockpit, and you guys are not just flying at a stage field, you guys are actually flying to an airport. So it's going to be pretty much how it will be when you get to your unit, and it's just you and another your co-pilot in the cockpit. That's as real as it gets right there. And once you complete BWS, then the next thing is selection. For selection, they take the class that's either ahead of you or behind you, and they combine the class for selection. So you'll be selecting with another class. It won't just be your class. Each class, they start off with each class with 52 people. We lost some people over the course of the course in Common Core, so we had obviously less, but they combine them, and they take out National Guard folks. Their selection, they already know what they're going to get, so they just put them to the side. Then they also divide based off of whether you are commissioned officer and warrant officer, and your ranking will then be based off of people in that category. So if you are a commissioned officer who's active duty, then you will be in a separate section from the warrant officers who are active duty. The only people who will be finding out who they're flying is obviously active duty, and so you will just be dividing up how many of each aircraft they have, and they give it one to the commissioned officer, one to the warrant officer. So let's say for your selection you have 3 C-12s available. Then I believe it's the warrant officers who get precedence over the commissioned officers. So they'll give maybe 1 C-12 to the commissioned officers and 2 C-12s to the warrant officers. So that's kind of how it works. If you get ranked, let's say your ranking is, 3, you're number 3 in your class. You're number 3 in your class, but then there's a separate section where you may be number 1 for all active duty warrants. So that's the one that counts for selection. And from there, you find out what aircraft you'll be getting. The aircraft that I wanted was 60s, and I got 60s, so I'm very happy about that. So for my selection, the aircraft that had the most during selection was 60s. I think we had 28 60s. Then after 60s was Apaches, we had 18. After Apaches was Chinook, we had 5. And after Chinooks, there was C-12s at 3. And for that selection, I will say that those numbers vary. It's not guaranteed that every time selection happens, you'll even get any C-12s. Or sometimes you'll have more Chinooks than that. I've seen selections where they had 8. So that's just to give you what my selection is, but don't expect that to be your selection when you get to this point. You could have a very Apache heavy selection, or you can have a very UH-60s heavy selection. It's not typical for there to be more Chinooks than Apaches or Blackhawks. Definitely not the typical norm for there to be more C-12s than anything. C-12s are usually the least if you have them, but that's just kind of to give you a general idea when selection happens. That's generally how it goes. Mostly 60s and 64s. Then after 64s is Chinooks. Then after Chinooks is C-12s. And that's going to wrap up today's video. That's everything that I have on flight school so far. I will be dropping a part 2 when my progress continues on. When I get into my 60s course, I will be dropping more information, so be on the lookout for that. But thank you guys for all of you who've been watching my videos so far. For any of you who have any questions, be sure to leave a comment down below, and I will try to answer to the best of my abilities. But yeah, that's all I have for today, and until next time, see you later.